You sit here today, perhaps not fully aware of why your eyes found their way to these words, why something within you insisted on stopping, listening, opening. Yet I assure you, with the certainty that comes from the deepest layers of psychic truth, that nothing in the psyche happens by accident. The psyche calls to itself what it is ready to encounter. And so if you are here, if you are reading this, it is because your spirit has begun to rise again from the chambers where it once lay dormant. It is because the comeback you have secretly prayed for, feared, resisted, or perhaps even sworn impossible, is already unfolding beneath the level of your conscious certainty. You do not merely stumble into a moment like this. You are summoned, something ancient in you, something that remembers who you are beyond the wounds, the betrayals, the shadows and silences, has signaled that the time of contraction is ending and the time of emergence is beginning. In my work, I have seen countless souls who believed they were lost when, in truth, they were merely descending into the necessary night of the unconscious. Before the spirit rises, it sinks. Before the light expands, it coils inward. The psyche follows the rhythm of the cosmos, inhalation and exhalation, death and rebirth, collapse and ascent. When life took from you the things you thought you needed, when you fell into despair, confusion, or emotional paralysis, it was not because you failed. It was because the self, the inner guiding principle that transcends the ego, had decided that your old identity could no longer carry the weight of your emerging destiny. And this is the first sign of the comeback that changes everything, the moment when the ego realizes it can no longer maintain the illusion of control. Something in you broke, yes, but it was not a breaking meant to destroy you. It was designed to release you from structures that confined your essence. Every collapse in your life, every ending, every dissolution of relationships, identities, or dreams was not an event of annihilation, but an alchemical burning away. Fire is not merely a force of destruction, it is a force of purification. What you lost was not taken from you as punishment, it was taken because your soul could no longer grow in the soil it had outgrown. As you sit with this truth, imagine yourself in a dimly lit room, the kind that appears in dreams before a transformation. Shadows move, not to frighten you, but to invite you to see what you avoided. A single candle flickers on the table, illuminating both light and darkness in equal measure. This is the psyche's eternal symbol, the coexistence of illumination and mystery. Your spirit rises not when life becomes easier, but when you accept the coexistence of your contradictions. The comeback you feel stirring within you is not powered by external validation or sudden strokes of luck. It is powered by an inner integration long overdue. You have been wandering, perhaps through a symbolic forest. The branches have scraped your skin. The nights were long. You felt the cold breath of doubt press against the back of your neck. But even in the darkness, something guided you, The unconscious does not abandon its seeker. The forest you walked through is the same forest. Every hero crosses before returning with a deeper truth. You felt lost because you were stepping away from the map the ego trusted. In stepping into the path the soul intended, in myth, this descent is never comfortable, never linear, never predictable. It is chaotic, disorienting, and rich with symbolic encounters, and yet each encounter, every fear, every setback, every heartbreak was preparing you to rise with a clarity you could not have developed in the light alone. Then comes the second movement of the soul, subtle but undeniable. The awareness that what you thought was weakness was actually gestation. The spirit does not rise through force, it rises through readiness. A seed does not break open because you demand it to. It breaks open because the pressure within becomes greater than the shell that confines it. You, too, reached a point where the shell of your former identity could no longer hold who you were becoming. The heartbreaks softened the rigid parts of your psyche. The disappointments stripped away illusions. The loneliness returned you to the sound of your own inner voice. Even your failures carried wisdom in their debris, urging you to release the persona you had been performing for the world. Often, when the spirit rises, it begins not with triumph, but with a quiet ache, a feeling that something is shifting. Though you cannot yet name it, you sense that the old life no longer fits. The relationships you once tolerated now disturb your peace. The habits you once clung to now feel heavy, restrictive. You begin to see the shadow of your own potential flickering on the wall of your psyche. This shadow is not your enemy. It is your unexpressed power waiting to be acknowledged, integrated, embodied. The shadow is everything you could be, but were too afraid to accept. To rise, you must meet it. To rise, you must make peace with the parts of yourself you once avoided. Let me speak plainly. A true comeback does not begin when the world finally sees your value. It begins when you finally see your own. The external world is merely a mirror. If you look into a mirror while carrying doubt, the reflection will mock you. If you look into a mirror while carrying unhealed wounds, the reflection will distort you. But if you look into a mirror while carrying the quiet conviction that your soul is awakening, the reflection will begin to align with that truth. You are rising not because circumstances improved, but because the inner architecture of your psyche is reorganizing itself around a new axis of meaning. This rising often begins with a dream that feels different, symbolic, charged with emotional electricity. Perhaps you saw yourself climbing a staircase, ascending a mountain, stepping into a new room. Perhaps you saw water clearing, fire rekindling, a door opening. Dreams are not random. They are the language of the unconscious. When your spirit rises, The unconscious begins to speak more clearly, more insistently, more intimately. It sends symbols, not commands. It sends images, not instructions. And yet, these images carry the architecture of your future self. In such moments, you may feel a tension growing inside you. On one hand, the old self clings to familiar patterns, resisting change with fear and nostalgia. On the other hand, the emerging self pulls you toward unknown landscapes. This tension is the crucible of transformation. The ego prefers safety, predictability, and the illusion of control. The soul prefers expansion, authenticity, and truth. When these forces collide, you experience what many call a spiritual awakening, but what I call, more precisely, the individuation process, awakening from its sleep. Your spirit rises when you stop betraying your deeper nature. For years, perhaps decades, you may have shaped yourself to fit the expectations of others. You silenced your intuition to maintain harmony. You dimmed your light to avoid judgment. You disciplined your desires to fit the mold of acceptability, but a spirit cannot stay compressed forever. Eventually, it pushes back. It demands expression. It demands that you live in alignment with your own truth rather than the collective's expectations. This push is not gentle. It shakes you. It destabilizes your old attachments. It brings people into your life who awaken dormant parts of you and removes people who kept you asleep. Picture, for a moment, a figure at the edge of a vast ocean. The waves crash, wild and unpredictable, and the figure stands barefoot on the sand. This figure is you. The ocean is the unconscious. The waves are the forces of your own destiny, calling you into a depth you once feared. You may think you are unprepared. You may think you are too wounded, too uncertain, too late in your journey to start again. But the ocean does not call the perfect. It calls the willing. It calls those who are brave enough to step into the water knowing they will not return as the same person. Your comeback, the one rising within you now, is not a return to who you used to be. It is a return to who you truly are beneath the layers of adaptation, trauma, and survival. It is the emergence of the self, the part of you that has always existed beyond fear, beyond conditioning, beyond human approval. And this self does not rise quietly. It rises with the force of accumulated truth. It rises through synchronicities that capture your attention. It rises through moments of clarity that cut through years of confusion. It rises through the sudden recognition that you are no longer willing to live a half-life. And as this rising begins, something remarkable happens. You stop seeking permission to be yourself. The chains of doubt loosen. The grip of people-pleasing weakens. You begin to sense a new internal authority, one that does not shout, but speaks with an unshakable calm. This calm is not passivity. It is power. It is the power of a person who is no longer fragmented, a person who has met their own darkness and lived, a person who knows that even the wounds they carry are part of their mythic journey. Your spirit rises when you understand that the comeback is not an event, it is an emergence, not a performance, a revelation, not a return to your old life, a birth into your real one. And as this revelation widens within you, you begin to sense a movement that is not entirely your own, as though the unconscious itself is rearranging the furniture of your inner world. One symbol shifts into another, one emotion fades, as a deeper one rises from beneath. The intensity of your past is no longer merely personal, it becomes archetypal, part of a universal pattern of renewal that every soul must encounter when it is called into its greater form. You are not simply healing your own wounds, you are reenacting the ancient myth of the hero, returning from the underworld with hard-won wisdom. This return, however, is delicate. It does not roar, it breathes. At first, it feels like a small pulse, an intuition that something essential is awakening. Though you cannot yet articulate it, there is a sense of inner expansion, subtle yet unmistakable, like a door opening in a room you thought had no exits. You cannot see where this door leads, but you feel the presence of possibility moving through it, brushing against your consciousness, like a silent wind. That wind carries memory, memory not of your biography, but of your essence. It carries the remembrance of what you agreed to become before life pressed its weight upon your shoulders. You must understand, when the spirit rises, it rarely does so with the approval of those around you. The collective often fears what is individuated. People may sense your internal shift and interpret it as disruption. You are no longer predictable to them, because you are no longer predictable to yourself. The patterns that once kept you small begin to dissolve, and the personas you performed to maintain harmony lose their grip. This can create tension, even conflict, but it is a necessary rupture. A soul that is rising cannot remain trapped in relationships built on your old self-silence. There comes a moment, quiet, but profoundly symbolic, when you realize you cannot return to who you were. Something has ended. Definitively, a version of you has died, and though this inner death may have been painful beyond measure, it also freed you. The ashes you are sifting through are not signs of failure. They are remnants of an identity that no longer had the strength to carry your growing truth. Then arises the third movement of the soul, the awareness that your comeback is not something to be earned, but something to be allowed. You do not climb toward it, you unfold into it. Like a flower opening at dawn, your spirit begins to move on its own accord, guided by forces deeper than your conscious will. You may feel a sudden burst of energy after years of fatigue, or a renewed passion for dreams you once abandoned. You may feel drawn to new environments, new studies, new people, as though life is positioning you like a chess piece for a future strategy. This is the self orchestrating your emergence. As these movements continue, you begin to notice synchronicities, those mysterious events that carry a sense of divine timing. A message appears when you most need clarity. A stranger speaks a sentence that answers a question you didn't dare articulate. A recurring symbol haunts your thoughts, appearing in dreams, conversations, even random images. These synchronicities are the footprints of the unconscious guiding your comeback. They are not coincidences. They are communications from the deeper layers of your being. Dreams, too, change their flavor. They become more vivid, charged with archetypal imagery. Perhaps you dream of fire, symbolizing purification, or water, symbolizing emotional rebirth, or mountains, symbolizing ascent. The unconscious uses these symbolic languages to remind you that your rising is not random. It is a stage in your individuation, a sacred unfolding that has been waiting for the right moment. Let me tell you something. Many do not realize the spirit rises fastest when the ego finally understands it cannot carry everything alone. The ego fights, resists, negotiates, bargains, yet at the end of this struggle, it must surrender to the larger intelligence of the psyche. This surrender is not weakness, it is alignment. It is the point at which you stop forcing life and begin dancing with it. Imagine yourself now standing before a mirror, not a physical mirror, but a psychic one. In it, you see not only your face, but the faces of your past selves, each one holding a story you once believed defined you. But as you look more closely, you notice that the reflection is shifting. The edges blur. A new figure emerges behind the other, stronger, clearer, more authentic. This figure is your rising spirit. It has been waiting for you to notice it. When the fourth movement of the soul arrives, it comes as a confrontation. The unconscious brings to the surface unresolved emotions, unspoken truths, unmet needs, unexpressed power. This confrontation is often mistaken as regression or emotional chaos, but it is actually purification. The psyche is clearing room for the self to take its rightful throne. Everything that kept you captive must rise so that it can be acknowledged, integrated, transformed. The comeback does not occur despite this confrontation. It occurs because of it. You may feel old wounds resurfacing, not to hurt you again, but to release the final fragments of their hold. You may feel anger that was swallowed for years, finally demanding expression. You may feel grief you had numbed yourself from suddenly flowing like a river. These are not setbacks, they are sacred visitations. They are the guardians at the threshold of your rebirth, ensuring that you do not carry outdated burdens into your new life. And in this sacred confrontation, something remarkable happens. You begin to develop inner authority. This authority is not loud, it does not argue, it does not seek validation, it simply knows. It knows what resonates with your spirit and what violates it. It knows which paths expand you and which shrink you. It knows which relationships nourish your truth and which betray it. This authority is the voice of the self, quiet but unshakable, gentle but absolute. Then rises the fifth movement of the soul, the shift from self-survival to self-expression. When you were in the darkness, everything in you focused on surviving emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, but as your spirit ascends, survival transforms into creation. Your energy begins to return. Your intuition becomes sharper. Ideas, desire, visions, and insights come to you with a clarity you have not felt in years. It is as though an inner river, once frozen, has begun to flow again. This flow is not random. It is the self guiding you toward your true path. The path you were always meant to walk, but were once too wounded or constrained to see. The comeback that is unfolding is not a return to the past, but a forward motion into the life that matches your authentic inner structure. Let me tell you a profound truth. When your spirit rises, your external world begins to reorganize itself accordingly. People who cannot match your frequency will naturally drift away. Opportunities that once eluded you will begin to appear. Paths that were blocked will open as though you carry a new key. This is not magic. It is alignment. Your internal reality and external reality are beginning to mirror one another. And as this alignment strengthens, you begin to sense a new form of courage awakening within you. Courage, not rooted in bravado or defiance, but in clarity. You no longer fear losing what was never meant for you. You no longer chase what undermines your soul. You begin to choose yourself with a quiet conviction, not out of ego, but out of truth. It is in this space, in the quiet center of your rising, that you realize something extraordinary. You are not coming back the way you left. You are returning with new eyes, a new spine, a new inner architecture. Your comeback is not an act of revenge, it is an act of restoration. Your spirit rises not to prove anything to the world, but to reclaim what you had forgotten, your own wholeness. And now, as the deeper layers of your psyche stir in synchrony, another movement begins, one that arrives with the quiet force of destiny. This is the moment when your inner world no longer feels like a battlefield, but a terrain under transformation. The very soil beneath your consciousness begins to shift and loosen, making space for roots that were once unable to break through. You feel as though something vast is preparing itself within you, a structure of meaning that has been assembling piece by piece behind the curtain of awareness. What once felt like chaos now begins to reveal its hidden architecture, as though the unconscious is drawing back a veil to show you that nothing, not even your deepest pain, was without purpose. There is a sacred inevitability to this stage. When the spirit rises, it does not ask for permission, it simply moves upward, like a flame drawn instinctively toward oxygen. You begin to notice that old fears lose their sharpness. Memories that once cut you now feel like distant echoes. The opinions of others no longer carry the weight they once had, because your sense of self no longer depends on the fragile scaffolding of external approval. You are anchored in something deeper now, something vast, ancient, and unshakable. Then comes another revelation, one not spoken by the mind, but whispered by the soul. The part of you that suffered the most was also the part capable of the greatest transformation. This understanding does not come from logic. It emerges from the symbolic realm where truth is not linear but circular. You begin to sense that the darkest corridors of your past were actually tunnels leading you toward this moment of rebirth. The wounds, the collapses, the heartbreaks, the losses all were alchemical fires designed to burn away falseness and strip you down to the essence of your being. This is the paradox of the rising spirit. What you thought was the end was actually the beginning. At this stage, the unconscious often sends dreams charged with profound emotional resonance. You might see yourself stepping out of a burning house, leaving behind everything that no longer defines you. You might see a bird emerging from a cracked egg. You might see yourself walking toward the horizon, the sun breaking through clouds as a symbol of the dawning self. These images are not mere fantasy. They are messages from the deepest layers of your psyche, affirming that the inner work is taking root. And then emerges the sixth movement of the soul, the realization that your rising is not solitary. You stand at the intersection of personal and collective transformation. Every individual awakening contributes to the awakening of the collective unconscious. When you break a pattern inherited from your ancestors, you heal more than your own story. You heal the lineage that shaped you. When you choose authenticity over conformity, you disrupt the archetypal chains that bind generations to suffering. When you refuse to betray your inner voice, you become a beacon for others trapped in their own silence. You begin to sense this connection as an invisible thread woven through your experiences. Perhaps you notice people around you feeling drawn to your presence, not because you seek attention, but because rising spirits naturally emit a resonance that others can feel. Your growth radiates subtly, influencing their emotions, awakening dormant truths within them. This influence is not intentional. It is archetypal. The self radiates like a gravitational force, pulling everything around it into alignment. But with this radiance comes another responsibility, the confrontation with the archetype of the shadow, not the darkness you experienced personally, but the collective darkness that reacts to individuals who rise above the ordinary patterns of existence. You may encounter envy, resistance, misunderstanding, or even hostility from those who feel threatened by your transformation. This is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is a sign that you are stepping into your authentic power. The collective often fears what it cannot control. Do not be alarmed by this reaction. The shadow must appear when the light grows brighter. It is not the enemy. It is the necessary contrast that sharpens your self-awareness. When someone tries to pull you back into old versions of yourself, they are acting as an unconscious emissary of the archetypal shadow. Testing the strength of your rising in these moments, Your spirit responds not with aggression, but with clarity. You begin to differentiate what belongs to you and what belongs to them. You no longer absorb projections as truth. You no longer collapse under emotional manipulation. You stand in your center, not out of pride, but out of alignment. The seventh movement of the soul emerges when you begin to sense the quiet joy of self-realization. This joy is not loud or euphoric. It is warm and steady, pulsing beneath your awareness like a heartbeat. You feel gratitude, not only for your triumphs, but for your wounds, recognizing them as the sculptors of your inner cathedral. You begin to appreciate solitude, not because you wish to withdraw from the world, but because you now see solitude as sacred communion with the self. You no longer fear silence, you crave it. For in silence, the essence of who you are speaks most clearly. This joy comes as a gentle sunrise, spreading slowly through every corner of your psyche. You begin to notice small things, light falling through a window, the sound of your breath, the subtle blossoming of intuition. These moments feel like reminders, as though life itself is whispering that you have re-entered the flow, the path, the alignment that had been calling your name for years. It is in this stage that you begin to understand the deeper meaning of your comeback. Your spirit is not rising to restore your old life. It is rising to initiate a new cycle of being, one in which you no longer move through the world fragmented, but whole. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means integration, the acceptance of your contradictions, your imperfections, your shadows, your light. You are not here to become flawless. You are here to become real. And as this realness settles in your bones, a profound shift occurs in how you see your past. The people who hurt you lose their power over your narrative. The regrets that once haunted you lose their sharpness. The failures that once defined you lose their weight. You begin to see your past not as a series of mistakes, but as an initiation, a training, a forging, a preparation for the person you were always meant to become. This shift also affects your relationship with the future, where once there was uncertainty, fear, or anxiety, there is now a sense of openness. You no longer project catastrophic fantasies onto your path. Instead, you sense that the unknown is not your enemy. It is your greatest ally. It is the place where your next symbols, synchronicities, and revelations await. You begin to feel a subtle partnership with the mysteries of existence, as though life itself is collaborating with you. And perhaps the most beautiful transformation of all emerges here. You finally stop running. You stop running from yourself, from your truth, from your past, from your potential. You turn inward, then outward, and you meet the world as someone reborn. Your spirit rises not as a desperate attempt to reclaim what was lost, but as a powerful emergence into what is newly yours, You become a carrier of your own destiny, not a victim of circumstance. The unconscious no longer frightens you, it fascinates you. The future no longer intimidates you, it calls to you, and the comeback that is forming in the unseen now becomes tangible. You feel its presence behind every decision, every intuition, every new boundary you enforce, every moment of truth you choose over comfort. Your life is no longer a repetition of old cycles. It is becoming a new narrative, one authored not by fear, but by the self. And now, as this journey reaches its final movement, the inner landscape you once feared begins to reveal its true form. What seemed chaotic is now coherent. What seemed meaningless is now mythic. The psyche has been weaving a pattern beneath your awareness, and now the pattern stands before you like an ancient tapestry complex, symbolic, radiant. Every thread that once felt random now shows its place. Every loss, every betrayal, every collapse, every moment of silence, every dream that haunted you, each was a strand in a design that could only be seen from this height. This vantage point of the rising spirit, you begin to understand that the comeback you are entering is not merely emotional or psychological, but archetypal. It mirrors the great mythic return that echoes through all cultures, the return of the wanderer, the rebirth of the phoenix, the resurrection of the self. You are not simply recovering from a difficult chapter, you are stepping into a new archetype of being. The old archetype, you lived under the wounded one, the invisible one, the misunderstood one, the silenced one, is dissolving. A new archetype emerges in its place, the awakened one, the sovereign one, the integrated one. At this height of the journey, your inner and outer worlds begin to synchronize in ways you can feel but not fully describe. You notice that your intuition sharpens into something resembling inner sight. You sense things before they happen. You understand people before they speak. You recognize patterns of energy in yourself and others, not because you are imagining them, but because you have entered a deeper layer of psychic perception. When the spirit rises, your consciousness expands beyond the surface of ordinary awareness. You begin to see the symbolic meaning behind every encounter, every obstacle, every emotion. This symbolic perception is a sign of individuation, reaching maturity. You no longer take life literally. You see the metaphor hidden inside every circumstance. A delay is not simply a delay. It is a pause orchestrated for your alignment. A rejection is not simply rejection, it is redirection. A loss is not simply loss, it is transformation disguised as emptiness. A sudden intuition is not random, it is the unconscious sending its guidance into the daylight of consciousness. Then comes the eighth movement of the soul, the emergence of inner sovereignty. This is the point at which you no longer seek outside yourself for direction, permission, or worth. The validation that once felt necessary now feels irrelevant. You are guided from within, not from without. The ego no longer sits on the throne. The self does, and the self rules differently. It rules with clarity, with stillness, with rootedness. It does not react, it responds, it does not grasp. It allows, it does not cling, it aligns. This sovereignty changes everything. Your relationships transform because you are no longer entering them from a place of hunger. Your work transforms because you are no longer driven by fear or scarcity. Your dreams transform because they are no longer fantasies of escape, but expressions of your deepest truth. This sovereignty is not dominance, it is authorship. You become the author of your life rather than its witness. And when sovereignty awakens, something even more profound arrives: purpose, not the superficial kind of purpose defined by achievement or recognition, but the deep, symbolic purpose that arises from the core of the psyche. This purpose is not found, it is revealed. It was always there, buried beneath layers of adaptation and survival instincts. As your spirit rises, these layers fall away, and what remains is a clear sense of why you are here, not in a cosmic, grandiose sense, but in the quiet, intimate sense of what your soul longs to express. At this stage, the unconscious begins to work with you rather than against you. Your dreams become collaborators. Your intuition becomes a compass. Your emotions become messengers rather than obstacles. Even your shadow becomes an ally, offering its raw power to strengthen your boundaries, sharpen your discernment, and energize your commitments. You are no longer at war with yourself. The fragmentation that once tore you apart now becomes integration. The child you once were, the adolescent you struggled through, the adult you survived, as they gather within you, not as competing identities, but as aspects of a unified whole. Your psyche becomes a constellation instead of a battlefield. Then comes the ninth movement of the soul expansion. As your inner world becomes coherent, your outer world begins to mirror that coherence. Opportunities arise that resonate with your authentic self. People appear whose presence feels like recognition rather than accident. Doors open that had been closed for years. Life begins to move with you instead of against you. This is not luck, it is alignment. When you are internally unified, the external world reflects that unity, but expansion is not merely external, it is also deeply internal. Your capacity to feel grows, your capacity to love grows, your capacity to hold complexity, uncertainty, and paradox grows. You become capable of embracing life in its fullness, not just the light, but the shadow, not just the joy, but the sorrow, not just the known, but the mystery. You realize that rising is not a destination, it is a state of being. And finally, there arrives the 10th movement of the soul, the summit of the rising spirit embodiment. This is the moment when the insights you have gained become lived truth. It is no longer enough to understand your worth. You begin to carry yourself as someone who knows it. It is no longer enough to sense your purpose. You begin to take steps toward it. It is no longer enough to glimpse your sovereignty. You begin to inhabit it. Embodiment is the true comeback. It is not an emotional high or a philosophical revelation. It is the daily act of living in alignment with the self. It is the quiet power of saying no when something violates your spirit. It is the steady courage of saying yes when something calls your soul forward. It is the discipline of honoring your boundaries. It is the tenderness of nurturing your inner child. It is the maturity of letting go when life asks you to. It is the strength of rising again and again, not because you must prove anything, but because your spirit is designed to expand. In embodiment, everything becomes sacred. The way you speak to yourself becomes sacred. The people you choose to share your energy with become sacred. The choices you make become sacred. Even your solitude becomes sacred. For it is in solitude that the self whispers its clearest truths. And so, as the final movement settles into your awareness, you understand the true meaning of your comeback. Your spirit is rising not to return you to who you once were, but to bring you into who you were always meant to become. This rising is irreversible. This rising is archetypal. This rising is your initiation into a life lived not from fear, but from depth, not from survival, but from expansion, not from fragmentation, but from wholeness. You are no longer the person who collapsed. You are the person who emerged. You are no longer the person who was wounded. You are the person who integrated the wound into wisdom. You are no longer the person who was lost. You are the person who found themselves in the mirror of the unconscious. And now you stand at the threshold of the life that will unfold from this rising, a life shaped not by old patterns, but by the power of your awakened spirit, a life that carries the quiet authority of someone who has walked into their darkness and returned with light, a life that will ripple outward, influencing others not through force, but through presence, a life that is not a comeback to the past, but an ascent into your true future. You are rising, and everything will change because of it.